The disco ball did not belong in the void. It spun lazily past Neptune's corpse-blue horizon, its mirrored panels fracturing the sun's feeble light into a grotesque strobe, as if space itself had been strapped to a glitter-clad carousel. The Zentharid armada paused, their ships coiling like serpents tasting unfamiliar air. They had come for conquest, for ice, for the bitter silence of Pluto's tomb. They had not come for disco. Deep within the missile's chrome-plated heart, Engineer Lieutenant Felix Wu traced the warhead's arming sequence with hands that hadn't stopped trembling since Jakarta. His reflection stared back from the console, a gaunt ghost in Rave goggles, haunted by equations that no longer added up. 12 dead. 12 years. The tribunal had called his mistake a tragedy. The Zentharid would call it a prelude. Harmonic resonance at 98%. Droned the AI. Its cheer obscene. Playlist primed. Suggested track. Stayin Alive. Optimal tempo for species annihilation. Felix's laugh tasted like battery acid. He designed the weapon as a joke. A middle finger to Earth Command's dry pragmatism. Let the lizards die dancing, he'd scrawled in the margins. But the math had teeth. The Zentharid hibernated in the cold, their biology allergic to heat, to noise, to the feverish pulse of human defiance. This bomb wasn't physics. It was Mockingbird, a glittering coffin serenading them with the Bee Gees. A proximity alert blared. On the scopes the armada shifted, their ships rippling in unison like scales on a nervous beast. They sensed the heresy in the harmonics, the beat that could crack their frozen veins. Felix tightened his grip on the detonator. Somewhere beyond the static, a child's shoe floated in a crater he'd sworn to forget. Detonation in 10, the AI sang. The disco ball hummed, its mirrors winking. Somewhere a galaxy held its breath. Chapter 1. Pluto's orbital outpost hung suspended in the black like a fossilized insect trapped in amber. Its corroded hull hummed with the lethargic pulse of aging reactors, their vibrations thrumming through the ribs of Lieutenant Felix Wu, as he slumped in his bunk. The air tasted stale, recycled through filters that had long surrendered to the metallic tang of rust. Felix's fingers drummed against his thigh. Not to any rhythm the outpost's comms spat out. Pop anthems from a dead decade. Corporate jingles for Earthside brands that no longer existed. But to the phantom bass line in his skull, his rhythm, the one he'd carved into existence back when his mistakes were smaller, and his hands didn't shake. He stared at the cracked screen of his wrist terminal. The court-martial transcript glowed there, a permanent ghost. Negligent discharge of ordnance. 12 civilian casualties. The words had long since calcified into a mantra. He'd memorized the victims' names, etched them into the underside of his bunk with a soldering iron on the 6-month voyage to Pluto. Atonement through exile, the tribunal had called it. He called it arithmetic. 12 dead. 12 years stationed at the edge of nowhere, breathing air thick with the greasy stink of hydraulic fluid and regret. The outpost shuddered. Felix's head snapped up, instincts flaring like a struck match. The ceiling fluorescence flickered, casting jagged shadows over the sweat-stained Rave posters he'd pinned to the walls, neon glyphs from another life, another Felix. Party crasher, they dubbed him after the Jakarta op, when he'd blown a militia compound sky-high to the drop of a Daft Punk deep cut. Now the only thing he crashed was the silence, smuggling bootleg BPMs into the comms array after lights out. A siren wailed. Red emergency lights bathed the room in the color of fresh meat. Felix was already moving, muscle memory overriding thought. His boots clanged against the grated floor, as he sprinted down the corridor, past flickering holoscreens spitting static. The air grew colder here, Pluto's breath seeping through the bulkheads. He could feel the ice giant beneath them, a silent leviathan, its frozen heart ticking like a dead clock. Command was chaos, officers hunched over radar arrays, their faces lit by the sickly green pulse of incoming blips. Captain Hale stood at the center, a monolith in a frayed uniform, her voice slicing through the panic. Report, 30 no 40 contacts, a junior tech stammered. Bearing 030, not human, not anything in the database. Felix shouldered past a cluster of wide-eyed engineers. The radar screen swam with serpentine silhouettes, their ships sleek and segmented, glowing faintly blue like bioluminescent eels. Zentharid. The name surfaced from some half-remembered intel brief. Cold-blooded, hibernation cycles. He'd skimmed it between synthweed hits, and another failed attempt to sleep. Hale turned, her gaze hooking into him. Woo, sensors picked up harmonic vibrations from their hulls. Ideas? He leaned in, squinting. The ships pulsed in unison, a slow rhythmic throb, like a heartbeat. No, like hibernation pods. Cold-blooded. They'd need external heat to function this far from a star. His mind snagged on a half-formed thought, but Hale was already barking orders. Earth Command's response just hit the cue. She gestured to a hologram, a spinning disco ball the size of a small moon, studded with warheads. Felix's laugh caught in his throat. His design, a joke draft he'd submitted during a synthweed haze, a planet cracker missile wrapped in retro kitsch. Maximum psychological impact, he'd scrawled in the notes. Nothing scares aliens like the 1970s. They're serious, he muttered. They're desperate. Hale corrected. You're the demo lead. Get it armed. The hangar bay was a cathedral of shadows, the disco ball suspended in its center like a dying star. Felix approached it, his breath pluming in the cold. Up close it was grotesque. A glittering tumor, its mirrored panels reflecting his gaunt face back at him in funhouse fragments. He pressed a palm to its surface. The vibration of the warheads thrummed through his bones, a discordant counterpoint to the distant siren's wail. 12 civilians, 12 years. His fingers danced over the arming console, inputting codes he'd never thought he'd use. The missile's AI chirped, its voice saccharine. Playlist initialized. Stayin Alive by Bee Gees. Volume set to apocalyptic. A hand gripped his shoulder. Felix turned to see Corporal Rakesh, their comms officer, holding out a cracked earpiece. For the vibe, Rakesh said, grinning weakly. Felix stared at it. Music. Always music. He'd scored every detonation he'd ever rigged. A private ritual, a way to make the math feel like art. But this was a dirge. He slid the earpiece in. The launch sequence was a blur, the disco ball tumbling into the void, its mirrors catching the dim sunlight in flashes of false cheer. Felix watched from the observation deck, his forehead pressed to the glass. The Zentharid armada loomed now, close enough to see the jagged seams of their ships, the eerie absence of life. Detonation in 5, the AI crooned. He closed his eyes. The earpiece crackled, then the opening bass line of Stayin Alive coiled into his skull, sticky sweet and relentless. He hummed along, the vibration in his throat syncing with the warhead's countdown. 3, 2, 1, light. Then sound, a roar that shattered the observation deck's glass, hurling Felix backward. He skidded across the floor, shards raining around him. The disco ball wasn't supposed to survive, but there it hung, intact, its mirrors blazing. The Zentharid ships disintegrated in waves, their hulls peeling back like burned film, but the ball pulsed. Light rippled from it in concentric rings, each beat synced to the music. Felix dragged himself upright. His ears rang. Blood trickled from his temple, painting the floor in Rorschach blooms. Beyond the ruined glass, the disco ball's gravity field warped space, pulling debris into a slow swirling orbit. A mangled Zentharid fighter spiraled past, its cockpit shattered. Inside, a scaled figure slumped, mouth frozen in a snarl. Cold-blooded, Felix thought numbly. They hibernated. They'd never stood a chance. The music still played. Stayin Alive looped, tinny and distorted through the wreckage. He limped toward the emergency airlock, his reflection fractured in the disco ball's mirrors. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement inside it, shadows twisting, reaching. Then the comms crackled. Woo, report. Hale's voice, fraying at the edges. He opened his mouth, but static drowned him out. The disco ball flared, its light swallowing the stars. When it faded, the Zentharid fleet was gone. The disco ball hung alone, its surface shimmering with a new oily sheen. Felix's earpiece hissed. Then a voice slithered through, guttural, layered with harmonics, no human throat could replicate. "We, here." The line died. Felix slid down the bulkhead, his hands trembling. Somewhere beneath the terror, beneath the guilt, a traitorous spark flickered. Alive. After 12 years, he'd finally made something that wasn't a tomb. Outside, the disco ball spun on, its light painting Pluto's ice in streaks of gold. Chapter 2. The debris field glittered like the aftermath of a drunken god's jewelry box. Felix floated in the shuttle's airlock, his breath fogging the visor as he stared at the disco ball. Elysium 909. The engineers had started calling it, though none could say why. Its mirrors no longer reflected. They absorbed, swallowing starlight, and regurgitating it, as a throbbing aurora, that painted the shuttle's hull in feverish pinks and greens. The music had never stopped. Stayin Alive still looped, but warped now, stretched into a discordant drone that vibrated in Felix's molars. He wondered, idly, if this was how tinnitus felt to ghosts. Pluto's outpost hung broken behind him, its spine cracked by the detonation's aftershock. The crew had evacuated to a jury-rigged habitat module, tethered to Elysium's equator, a flimsy raft lashed to a leviathan. Felix's fingers drifted to the scar on his temple, still tender. 12 years of exile, and now this, a tomb that refused to die, humming with a rhythm that made his nightmares dance. "Woo, you're clear." The comms officer's voice fizzed in his ear. "Rakesh, probably." They'd stopped using ranks after the ceiling collapsed in Mess Hall B. Felix pushed off into the void. The tether line slithered behind him, a silver thread connecting him to what passed for safety. His suit jets flared, guiding him toward Elysium's surface. Up close, the disco ball wasn't a sphere anymore. It had grown, fractalized, its geometry folding in on itself like a metal lung breathing in the dark. Mirrors had become scales, overlapping and serrated, their edges glowing faintly bioluminescent. Zentharid tech. He'd seen the same eerie blue in the wreckage of their ships, his boots magnetized to the surface with a hollow clang. The music here was a physical thing, a subsonic growl that pressed against his ribs. He crouched, running a glove over a scale. It pulsed warm, then cold, as if recoiling. Guilty, he thought. We're both guilty. Nas. The first defector arrived at dusk. Felix was in the habitat module's observation blister, rewiring a fried amp stack, when the alarms blared. Not the shrill attack klaxons of before, but a low guttural moan that shuddered through the bulkheads. He peered through the reinforced glass. A Zentharid fighter drifted toward Elysium, its hull scorched and bleeding coolant. It moved like a wounded animal, listless, drawn by the disco ball's pulse. "They're back," Maravos muttered. She stood in the doorway, her lab coat smudged with engine grease, a neural scanner clutched like a talisman. Her eyes never left the ship. "Hibernation cycles. Your bomb woke them up." Felix didn't answer. He was counting the fighter's thruster burns. Erratic, desperate, a survivor, not a soldier. The ship docked with a shuddering scrape, its airlock mating clumsily with Elysium's flesh, or what passed for flesh. The disco ball's surface had split open, a jagged maw ringed with crystalline teeth. It looked less like a docking port, and more like a throat. "They'll die in there," Mara said. "Their biology can't handle sustained noise. That's why they attacked, why they feared your weapon." "Then they're idiots," Felix said. His voice surprised him, hoarse, angry. "Coming back to the thing that killed them." Mara's scanner beeped. She frowned at the readout. "Not back, home. Mas." The Zentharid's name was Vars. He emerged from the fighter's wreckage 6 hours later, scaled and hunched, his carapace cracked along the spine. Frost clung to his eye ridges, the bitter gift of dead life support. Felix watched through Elysium's cameras as the alien staggered through mirrored corridors, claws dragging against walls that thrummed in time to Stayin Alive. The Zentharid paused once, tilting his head at a warped reflection, his own face, stretched and multiplied into infinity. Then he vomited black bile, and kept moving. He's heading for the core, Mara said. She'd commandeered a monitor, her fingers flying over keys. Look, the music's loudest there. It's pulling him. Felix chewed a stim tab. The bitter chalk taste grounded him. Let him die. No. Her hand gripped his wrist, surprisingly strong. They're not here to fight. They're listening. The core was a cathedral of sound. Felix found Vars curled beneath the disco ball's heart, a pulsating orb of plasma webbed with glowing filaments. The alien's claws were buried in the floor, his chest heaving. The music here was a living thing, a baseline that liquefied bone marrow. Felix's visor cracked under the pressure, spider web fissures spreading. He tore it off, gasping. The air smelled like ozone and burnt honey. Varsk turned. His eyes were lidless, pupils slit vertical. For a heartbeat, Felix saw his own reflection in them. Small, fragile, a hairless primate drowning in echoes. Then the alien spoke. Krar. Jacques. The words buzzed, layered with harmonics. Felix's translator implant stuttered. Neon translatable, hive song, untranslatable. Felix knelt, his ears bled, hot trails down his neck. You understand me? Varsk's throat pulsed, a wet click, then mangled English. You broke. Song. Felix gestured to the core. You're welcome. The alien hissed. Not your song. Ours. A claw tapped his own chest, then the floor. Hive. Binds. Controls. You shattered it. The core flared. Felix flinched as the plasma orb spat a filament, a glowing tendril that brushed Varsk's brow. The alien shuddered, then stilled. When he spoke again, his voice was clearer, smoother. Stolen. We were artists. Before the war mind. Varsk's claws flexed, carving grooves in the floor. Sculptors of resonance. Then they made us soldiers, cut our tongues, burned our songs. Felix thought of the court-martial transcript, the way the tribunal had edited his words, turning. I miscalculated into gross negligence, a different kind of burning. Why come here? He asked. Varsk pressed a claw to the core. The filaments brightened, humming. Your machine, it remembers. Our old frequencies, our art. The music shifted. Stayin Alive fractured, its disco beat dissolving into something older. A deep resonant thrum that made Felix's teeth ache. Varsk's spines rippled, a mournful rhythm. You can't stay, Felix said. The alien's gaze sharpened. Nor can you. They found the bodies 3 days later. A Zentharid scouting party, frozen in the debris field. Their ship had been clawed open from the inside. Hibernation pods ruptured. Felix hovered beside one, his helmet light catching the ice encasing the pilot's face. A female, her jaws parted in a silent snarl. The pod's readout flickered. Genetic signature match. Zyra, loyalist swarm queen. Siblings, Mara said. She floated nearby, her scanner aimed at the pod. Varsk's brood sister. She's hunting him. Felix touched the ice. It melted under his glove, revealing a tattoo on Zyra's brow. A jagged rune. Families overrated. Not to them. Their hive mind runs on kinship harmonics. Betrayal is cacophony. Mara's voice softened. He left her to die. Now she'll erase him. And us. The ice cracked. Felix jerked back, as Zyra's corpse shifted, her dead hand slumping against the pod's glass. Frost bloomed across her eyes. Stayin Alive pulsed from Elysium, faint but insistent. That night, Felix dreamt of Jakarta. The child's shoe floated in the bomb crater, pink and pristine. He'd stared at it while the medics pried shrapnel from his leg. How? He'd asked. How is it untouched? The sergeant hadn't answered. They'd bulldozed the crater. An hour later, the shoe buried under rubble and denial. He woke choking. The habitat module's air tasted like burnt copper. Varsk stood in the doorway, silhouetted by Elysium's pulse. Your song is broken too, the alien said. Felix reached for his sidearm. Get out. Varsk didn't move. You fear what you cannot control. The beat, the math. You wrap your bombs in noise to hide from their cost.
The words hooked under Felix's ribs. He thumbed the pistol's safety. You here to lecture me, Lizard King? A hiss. Varsk's claws flexed. We will die here. Your people, mine. Unless we, remix. The alien tossed a data crystal. Felix caught it, the edges biting his palm. A hologram flared. Elysium schematics, overlaid with Zentharid harmonics. The core can shield us, Varsk said. Turn their hive song against them. But it needs human resonance. Your imperfections. Felix stared at the hologram. The math danced, beautiful and alien. A symphony of survival. Why? He asked. Varsk turned to leave. Because broken songs yearn for duets. Mive. By dawn, they'd rewired the core. Felix dangled from a harness inside Elysium's heart, his gloves slick with bioluminescent coolant. Varsk's claws were a blur, splicing human cables into Zentharid nodes. The core's pulse quickened, sinking to Felix's hammering heartbeat. It'll fry our brains, Felix said. Varsk hissed, only the weak ones. Mara's voice crackled over comms. Loyalist fleet inbound. 30 minutes. The core flared. Felix's vision whited out. When it cleared, he saw them. Shadows in the mirrors. Zentharid defectors. Dozens now. Their ships docked like remora to Elysium's flesh. They pressed claws to the walls, their spines rippling in unison. A chant vibrated through the floor, wordless and raw. They're amplifying the shield, Varsk said. His voice bled static, the core's energy chewing through his translator. Your turn. Felix gripped the console. The keys felt alien, the interface half human, half something else. He closed his eyes. Jakarta's bomb site. The child's shoe. His fingers moved. The core detonated sound. A chord that tore through Elysium's mirrors and into the void. The loyalist ships rippled, their hulls buckling under the frequency. Zyra's flagship faltered, its weapons darkening. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the resonance bomb hit.
Chapter 3. The bomb's pulse hit like a tuning fork struck against the spine of the universe. Felix felt it first in his molars, a subsonic shiver that liquefied the fillings, then the marrow, then the memories. For 3 heartbeats, he was back in Jakarta's ashes, crouched in the crater, the child's pink shoe balanced on his palm like an accusation. Then reality snapped back, warped and weeping. Elysium 909 groaned. Its mirrored flesh rippled, scales peeling back to vomit shards of glass and bioluminescent coolant into the void. Felix clung to a support beam, his gloves slipping on ice that wasn't cold, wasn't water, wasn't anything the human lexicon could name. Through the observation blister, the loyalist fleet hung suspended in the aftershock, their jagged hulls shimmering with fractal patterns, like frost on a dead man's window. They're hibernating, Mara said. She stood at a shattered console, her fingers dancing over cracked keys, her voice a frayed wire. The resonance bomb, it triggered their dormancy cycles. For now, Felix spat blood, his tongue had bitten itself during the pulse. Atonement through physics, he thought wildly. 12 years of penance, and God's a DJ. Versk crouched nearby, his carapace smoking. The Zentharid's claws were buried in the floor, anchoring him as Elysium convulsed. His translator implant spat static, but Felix didn't need words to understand the look in those lidless eyes. Recognition, kinship, the shared weight of knowing that survival tastes metallic, like a gun barrel pressed to the roof of the mouth. How long? Felix rasped. Mara didn't glance up. Zyra's flagship is shielded. She'll reboot the fleet. Hours, maybe less. A shadow passed over the blister. Felix craned his neck. The disco ball's core, still intact, still pulsing, had birthed tendrils of light that lashed the void, snaring debris, Zentharid wreckage, the splintered remains of Pluto's outpost. The tendrils glowed a sickly green, the color of a fading bruise. They were building something. A lattice, a web, a cage. It's learning, Mara whispered. Felix's wrist terminal buzzed. The schematics Versk had given him flickered, a hybrid of human engineering and Zentharid harmonics, a blueprint for turning Elysium into a weapon that could silence Zyra's fleet without slaughter. A bridge, not a bomb, Versk had called it. Felix called it a fairy tale. He pushed off the beam, his boots magnetizing to the floor with a hollow thud. The corridor to the core was alive now, the walls breathing, mirrors melting and reforming into spirals that made his eyes ache. He could hear the defectors chant through the metal, a wordless rumble that vibrated in his molars. They'd docked their ships to Elysium's flesh, these Zentharid artists turned exiles, their hulls grafted like barnacles to a whale's ribs. As he passed an open airlock, one nodded to him, a female with a cracked carapace, her claws fused to a console as she fed alien code into the core. Her spines rippled in a rhythm that almost sounded like Stayin Alive. The core chamber was a cathedral of dissonance. The plasma orb had split into twin suns, their light warring, gold and cobalt, heat and frost. Between them floated Krill, the defector who'd sacrificed himself to cripple Zyra's vanguard, or what remained of him. His body had been unraveled by the resonance bomb, his atoms braided into the tendrils that now knit the cage. His face flickered in the storm, mouth open in a silent scream. Another one bites the dust, Felix thought, and the gall of it almost made him laugh. Versk materialized beside him, reeking of burnt honey and static. You see now, the cost. Felix didn't turn. You knew this would happen. A claw gestured to Krill's ghost. I knew sacrifice would. Not this. The twin cores pulsed. Felix's bones hummed. He could feel Elysium's hunger in his teeth, an ache that transcended pain, a need to consume, to grow, to become. It wasn't just Zentharid tech anymore. It wasn't human. It was something that had tasted both species' sins, and decided to build a monument from the wreckage. Your plan, Felix said. The shield. It won't hold. Versk's spines flattened. Zyra's fleet is bound by hive song. Break the song. Break her. And how do we do that? Ask nicely. The alien seized his arm, claws piercing his suit. Felix tensed, but there was no threat in the grip, only desperation. The core remembers our old songs. Before the war mind, if we feed it human resonance, your imperfect frequencies, it can mimic the hive's harmonics, infiltrate, corrupt. Felix stared at the alien's claws, the way they trembled. He's scared, not of dying, of failing. The realization was a key turning in a rusted lock. You want to duet with a doomsday device, Felix said. Versk released him. I want to remix a requiem. They met Zyra in the graveyard of her own making. Her flagship breached Elysium's cage at dawn, or what passed for dawn this far from the sun. The ship was a scar in the void, its hull studded with corpses frozen mid-scream, loyalists who'd welded themselves to the exterior, as living shields. Their faces were iced masks, their claws still raised in defiance. Felix watched through the blister as the ship docked, its boarding tendrils drilling into Elysium's flesh. The disco ball shuddered, mirrors shattering, but the core's light burned brighter, hungry. Mara handed him a modified neural link. Its wires frayed. It'll sink you to the core, you and Versk. Just don't think too hard. Your brain isn't wired for harmonic calculus. Felix clipped the device to his temple. What happens if I do? You'll forget your name, your face, the difference between silence and noise. She hesitated, then pressed a hand to his chest. Don't die. I'd hate to rewire the whole system myself. Zyra's boarding party found them in the core chamber. They came in a storm of claws and static, their war chants vibrating the air into knives. Felix fired blindly, his pistols recoil a familiar comfort. Versk fought beside him, his movements fluid, lethal, but Zyra was already there, a specter in the storm, her carapace polished to a mirror finish, her claws singing with stolen resonance. Traitor, she hissed, her translator mangling the word into a weapon. Versk stepped forward, spines flared. Sister. The cores flared, light bathed them, gold and cobalt, and for a heartbeat, Felix saw it, the bond between them, frayed but unbroken. Zyra's claws trembled, Versk's voice softened into a harmonic, even the translator couldn't butcher. Then the moment shattered. Zyra lunged. Versk parried. Their clash was sound given form, screeching metal, hissing static, the wet crunch of carapace meeting flesh. Felix scrambled behind a console, his neural link spitting sparks. The core's song was a migraine now, a drill bit in his skull. He fumbled with the neural interface, his blood-slick fingers slipping. Jakarta, the shoe, the silence after the blast, his vision tunneled, the console keys blurred. Somewhere beyond the pain, Mara's voice crackled over comms, inverting the bomb's frequency. It's not a weapon, it's a key. Zyra's claw found Versk's throat. Felix closed his eyes, and let the core in. Maya. The universe folded. Suddenly, he was everywhere, in the Loyalist ship's hibernation pods, where warriors dreamed of songs they'd never sung, in Zyra's marrow, where betrayal festered like a rotten cord, in the disco ball's birth scream, the moment his bomb had birthed something greater and hungrier than he'd ever intended, and deeper, a child's laughter. Jakarta's market, vibrant and pungent with durian and diesel, the click of the detonator in his hand, 12 dead. The core whispered to him, not in words, but in frequencies. It showed him the math, not the sterile equations of his tribunal, but a living calculus of light and loss. It showed him how to unmake the resonance bomb, to reweave it into a bridge. All it asked for was a song. Felix opened his mouth, and sang. When he woke, Zyra was gone. Versk crouched over him, his carapace streaked with coolant and blood. The chamber was silent. No, not silent, changed. The cores had merged, their light now a soft silver, and the tendrils cradled Zyra's flagship, its hull cocooned in a lattice of light and memory. She lives, Versk said. His voice was raw, stripped of static, the hive song. She hears it now. The truth. Felix sat up, his skull throbbed, but the neural link was cold. What truth? The alien gestured to the core. Inside its light shadows danced, Zentharid and human, their forms blurred, their voices woven into a chorus that made the mirrors weep. That survival, Versk said, is a chorus, not a solo. Chapter 4. The silence after the storm was a living thing. It pressed against Felix's eardrums, like the weight of deep water, thick and resonant, as if the universe itself had paused to listen. Elysium 909 hummed around him, its mirrored corridors, now veined with bioluminescent tendrils that pulsed in time to a heartbeat. Felix could no longer distinguish as his own. He stood in the core chamber, the air thick with the scent of ozone, and something sweetly organic, like the first breath after rain. The merged core glowed softly, a silver orb cradling shadows that danced in endless loops. Zentharid war chants woven with human lullabies, a chorus of survival sung in two tongues. Zyra's flagship hung suspended outside the observation blister, cocooned in Elysium's luminous lattice. Frost still clung to its hull, but the corpses welded to its surface had begun to thaw, their faces slack, their claws uncurled. Felix wondered if they dreamed, if the core's song had seeped into their hibernating minds, replacing the hive's rigid harmonics with something softer, something that allowed for doubt, for art. Versk found him there, his carapace still streaked with the residue of battle, the jagged rune on his brow dulled to a scar. He moved differently now, less like a soldier, more like a man relearning the weight of his bones. Without a word, he pressed a claw to the glass, where Zyra's silhouette flickered in the flagship's command pod, her spines rigid, her face a mask of frost and fury. She'll never forgive you, Felix said. The alien's throat clicked, a sound that might have been a laugh. Forgiveness is a human luxury, for her it is enough that she hears. The core's light shifted, casting Zyra's shadow in stark relief. For a moment her claws rose as if to strike the glass, then faltered, her head tilted, spines rippling in a rhythm that mirrored the tendrils outside. Felix felt it then, a tremor in the floor, a vibration that wasn't sound but memory. The core was showing her something, a vision perhaps, a truth. He turned away, let the siblings wrestle their ghosts in the dark. Mirith's transmission arrived, as Felix was repairing the neural link,
his fingers steady despite the tremor in his wrists. The console screen flickered to life, bathing the control room in sterile white light. Admiral Kincaid's face materialized, her features sharp as a blade, her voice crisper than the static between stars. "Lieutenant Wu, the Council offers its gratitude, and a promotion." Felix didn't look up. He traced the frayed wires of the link, the ones Mara had jury-rigged with Zentharid filaments. They glowed faintly, alive in a way Earth's tech never was. "I'll pass." Kincaid's eyebrow twitched. "This isn't a request. Elysium is a strategic asset. It requires oversight." A laugh scraped from Felix's throat. Oversight. As if they could leash the thing they'd birthed. A disco ball turned diplomat. A bomb turned bard. He glanced at the core's feed on the monitor, where Zentharid defectors drifted alongside human engineers, their claws and hands dancing over hybrid consoles. One of them, a female with a cracked carapace, caught his eye and rippled her spines in a salute. "It doesn't need us," Felix said. "Not anymore." Kincaid leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "And you?" The neural link sparked, flooding his skull with a fleeting warmth, a sensation like sunlight on skin, like the press of a crowd at a rave, like the weight of a child's shoe in his palm. 12 years of exile, 12 ghosts. "I'm staying," he said, and killed the feed. Mira found him in the garden. It had grown in the wreckage of the habitat module, a tangle of earth ferns and Zentharid crystal flora, their roots braided through the floor plates. The air here was thick with humidity, and the low thrum of the core's song, a melody that had seeped into the walls, into their blood. She stood at the edge of the foliage, her lab coat traded for a defector's woven shawl, its threads shimmering with embedded harmonics. "They're calling it the Bridge of Frequencies," she said, nodding to the viewport. Beyond, Elysium's tendrils stretched into the void, connecting loyalist ships to defector hulls in a luminous web. First joint project, a transit system for whatever comes next. Felix crouched to prune a fern, his shears biting through leaves that sang as they fell. "You sound like a diplomat, and you sound like a man who's finally stopped running." He stilled, the shears trembled in his grip. Jakarta's crater yawned in his mind, but the edges were softer now, blurred by the core's silver light. Mara knelt beside him, her shoulder brushing his. She didn't speak, didn't push, simply existed in the quiet, her breath syncing with the garden's pulse. When she finally rose, her hand lingered on his back, a touch as light as a bass drop. "The defectors want to meet you. They've started a collective. DJs they call it." Felix snorted. "Let me guess, Versk's idea. He's rebranding. The Lizard King. Remember?" The shears clattered to the floor. Felix stared at his hands, calloused, scarred, alive. "Tell them I'll be there." The inaugural set was held in the core chamber. Defectors and humans packed the room, their bodies swaying in the silver light, their rhythms clashing and merging. Versk stood at the central console, his claws dancing over holographic sliders, weaving Zentharid war drums with the thrum of Earth's punk anthems. The sound was chaos. It was perfect. Felix lingered at the edge, his back against a mirror that throbbed with the beat. He watched a young Zentharid female, Krill's niece, maybe, spin records alongside a human tech, their laughter harmonizing across species. The core pulsed above them, its light etching their joy into the walls. Zyra entered unnoticed. She stood in the shadows, her carapace stripped of loyalist sigils, her claws unarmed. The music washed over her, and for a moment, her spine stiffened, the old fury flashing in her eyes. Then Versk dropped the beat, a deep resonant thud that shook the floor, and her posture cracked, her claws twitched, her head dipped. When she began to move, it wasn't a dance, not quite, but her spines rippled in time, a hesitant echo of the defector's rhythm. Felix caught Versk's eye across the room. The alien nodded, once, and cranked the bass. Miriv afterward. Felix climbed to the observation deck. Pluto hung below, its icy plane streaked with gold where Elysium's light kissed the surface. The disco ball's tendrils stretched now to the horizon, a bridge of light connecting dead rock to living hope. Mara's footsteps echoed behind him, Steady. Certain. They're playing your song, she said. Stayin Alive drifted through the vents, warped and remixed, its disco beat layered with Zentharid throat singing. Felix leaned into the viewport, his breath fogging the glass. It's better now. Mara joined him, her reflection blurring with his in the polished surface. What changed? He thought of the core's visions, of Zyra's trembling claws, of the neural link's warmth. Like absolution, we did. The silence between them was no longer empty. It thrummed with the weight of unspoken things, of hands not held, of words not wasted. Mara's fingers brushed his, once, before she turned to leave. Mara, she paused. Stay. Her smile was a quiet revolution. I already have. Epilogue. The club thrives. Elysium 909 spins on, its mirrors polished by solar winds, its tendrils knitting the galaxy's wounds. Humans and Zentharid crowd its halls, their laughter a symphony of broken pasts and mended futures. Felix tends the sound system, his hands steady, his ghosts quiet. Versk's beats shake the void. On quiet nights, when the bass fades, Felix climbs to the garden. Mara meets him there, her shawl glittering with starlight, her silence a language he's learned by heart. They sit among the singing ferns, their shoulders touching, and watch the bridge of frequencies pulse, a rhythm older than war, brighter than regret. Somewhere beyond the glass, a new track drops, the walls hum, the core glows, and the universe dances. Felix adjusts the mixer, the stars winking through the viewport. Overkill is just a word, he murmurs, as Versk's war chant melts into a Bowie riff. Survival's a rhythm,